I stood in my parents' living room, surrounded by laughter and voices, yet feeling completely invisible. For 30 years, my family called me the quiet one, the slow one, the failure. My older brother Derek was the golden child. My younger sister Samantha was the princess. And me, I was just Brooks, the middle child nobody remembered. But that evening I carried something in my jacket pocket that would change everything forever. To understand why that moment mattered, we need to go back to where it all began. Before we dive into this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. If you have ever felt unseen by the people who are supposed to love you the most, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. This story is for everyone who has ever been underestimated. Now let me take you back to the beginning. I grew up in a suburban neighborhood in Connecticut in a house that looked perfect from the outside. White picket fence, manicured lawn, 2 cars in the driveway. My father Harold had built a mid-sized construction company from nothing. He was proud of that fact and reminded us constantly. My mother Patricia stayed home to raise us. She was the kind of woman who measured her worth by her husband's approval. Then there was Derek, my older brother, 4 years ahead of me. Tall, athletic, charismatic. He was everything my father wanted in a son. He played basketball, made honor roll, and had a handshake that could win over any room. Samantha came 2 years after me. She had my mother's delicate features and learned early how to charm her way through life. And then there was me, Brooks, the middle child. I arrived during the busiest year of my father's career when he was expanding his company into 3 new counties. I do not think he even made it to the hospital until hours after I was born. From the very beginning, I was an afterthought. I was not tall like Derek. I was not charming like Samantha. I was quiet. I preferred books to balls, observation to conversation. In a family that valued noise and achievement, my silence was interpreted as emptiness. When I was 8 years old, I experienced what I now recognize as my first real heartbreak. My school held an end-of-year ceremony, and I had been selected to read a poem in front of the entire auditorium. I practiced for an entire week, standing in front of my bedroom mirror, reciting each line until I had it memorized perfectly. I was so excited to show my parents what I could do. The day of the ceremony, I kept looking at the entrance, waiting for my father to walk through those doors. He had promised he would be there. My mother sat in the back row, her phone glowing in her hands as she typed message after message. When my turn came, I walked to the microphone with shaking legs. I delivered every line without a single mistake. When I finished, I looked out at the crowd searching for my father's face. He was not there. He arrived 30 minutes late after everything was over. Something about a client meeting that ran long. On the drive home, no one mentioned my performance. Instead, my mother talked about Derek's upcoming basketball tournament. My father discussed strategy for the game. I sat in the back seat staring out the window, realizing for the first time that I was invisible to them. My 10th birthday arrived with the same pattern. For weeks, I had been asking for a set of books I had discovered at the public library. They were about money, about how it worked, about how people built wealth. I was fascinated by the concept that numbers on a page could translate into real power. When I finally worked up the courage to ask my father, he laughed. "Books. You need to get outside and play like your brother," he said, shaking his head. "Stop daydreaming and do something useful." T. On my birthday, I unwrapped my gift to find a football. I had never shown any interest in football. That same day, Derek received a brand new bicycle because he had won some basketball award the week before. It was not even his birthday. I kept the football in my closet untouched. I went to the library instead and read those books for free, hiding them inside my backpack so no one would ask questions. By the time I turned 12, the family dynamic had become painfully clear. One evening at dinner, report cards were being discussed. I had earned mostly B grades with 1 A in mathematics. Derek, as usual, had straight A marks across the board. My father set down his fork and looked directly at me. "Derek is going to take over the company someday," he announced to the table. "And Brooks, well, we will see if he can figure out how to do anything." My mother said nothing. She just kept eating, her eyes fixed on her plate. Samantha giggled and whispered something to Derek, who smirked in response. That night, I went to my room and pulled out a notebook I had been keeping hidden under my mattress. I opened it to a blank page and wrote a single sentence: "One day I will prove them wrong." I did not cry. I did not argue. I just made a quiet promise to myself that I would keep for the next 2 decades. Everything changed when I was 14 years old, though nobody in my family knew it at the time. There was an old man who lived 3 houses down from us. His name was Leonard Wallace. Most people in the neighborhood thought he was strange. He lived alone in a modest house with peeling paint and an overgrown yard. He drove an old car and wore the same faded sweaters year after year. People assumed he was poor, maybe a little eccentric. One afternoon I was walking home from school when I saw him struggling to pick up letters that had scattered from his mailbox. The wind had blown them across his lawn. Without thinking, I jogged over and helped him gather them. He thanked me and invited me inside for a glass of water. What I saw in that house changed the entire trajectory of my life. Every wall was lined with bookshelves, and every shelf was packed with volumes about investing economics, financial markets, and wealth building. There were stacks of financial newspapers on his coffee table and notebooks filled with handwritten calculations. I must have been staring with my mouth open because he chuckled and said, "Not what you expected, is it?" I shook my head, unable to form words. Leonard Wallace told me his story that afternoon. He had worked on Wall Street for 25 years, starting as a junior analyst and eventually managing portfolios worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He had retired early, choosing to live simply because he had no one to impress and nothing to prove. His total net worth, he casually mentioned, was somewhere around $4 million. "Why do you live like this?" I asked, genuinely confused. "You could have a mansion." He smiled and said something I have never forgotten. "True wealth is freedom, not the approval of others. I do not need a big house to know who I am." From that day forward, Leonard became my mentor. Twice a week, I would visit his house after school, and he would teach me everything he knew. He explained compound interest, the power of long-term investing, the difference between assets and liabilities, and how to read financial statements. He gave me books that my own father had mocked me for wanting. I never told my family about Leonard. They would have laughed. They would have told me I was wasting my time. So I kept it secret, building knowledge in the shadows, while they continued to overlook me. The years of high school were brutal in their own quiet way. Derek graduated and went off to a prestigious university, his entire education paid for by our father. When it was my turn to apply for colleges, I asked my father for help with tuition. He barely looked up from his newspaper. "You are not like Derek," he said flatly. "I am not wasting money on someone with no potential. Figure it out yourself." So I did. I applied for every scholarship I could find. I got a part-time job at a grocery store, then added shifts at a fast food restaurant. I worked 30 hours a week while maintaining my grades. Every paycheck I set aside 70% and invested it following the principles Leonard had taught me. When Derek's college graduation came, the entire family flew to Boston for the ceremony. I was told to stay home and watch the house. There was not enough room in the car, my mother explained, though I knew they could have made room if they wanted to. I spent that weekend alone, sitting in my empty childhood home. But instead of feeling sorry for myself, I logged into my investment account and saw that my portfolio had grown to $4,000. It was not much by most standards, but it was mine. Every penny earned through my own work, my own discipline, my own quiet determination. I enrolled in community college, studying accounting. It was not glamorous, but it was practical. My father's only comment was that at least I was trying, even though he did not expect much. Samantha told her friends it was embarrassing to have a brother at a community college. I let their words wash over me like water off stone. I had learned to stop seeking their approval. Through my 20s, the pattern continued. Derek rose quickly in our father's company, eventually becoming vice president. He married a woman from a wealthy family, bought a large house, drove expensive cars. Samantha married a man who worked in finance, and they lived in a nice suburb with all the appearances of success. And me, I became an accountant at a small firm. I made a modest salary. I lived in a tiny apartment. I drove a car that was 10 years old. To my family, I was the embodiment of mediocrity. At every family gathering, I was the one who sat in the corner. No one asked about my life, my work, my dreams. My father would give speeches about Derek's accomplishments. My mother would brag about Samantha's lifestyle. When my name came up, it was always with a tone of disappointment or pity. "Why are you still single?" My mother asked me when I was 27. Who would want to date an ordinary accountant? "You know, I could lend you some money if you need it," Samantha offered when I was 28, her voice dripping with condescension. "You just look so sad all the time." "Not everyone is meant to succeed," Derek told me at a Christmas dinner when I was 30, patting me on the shoulder like I was a lost cause. "Someone has to be average." I absorbed every insult, every dismissal, every pitying glance, and through it all I kept investing. I kept learning. I kept building. When I was 29, Leonard Wallace passed away. He was 83 years old, and he died peacefully in his sleep. I was devastated. He was the only person in my life who had ever truly believed in me. A week after his funeral, I received a letter from his attorney. Leonard had left me all of his books and a handwritten note. The note said, "You already have everything you need. Never seek approval from those who do not deserve to give it. Live for yourself." I sat in my small apartment and cried for the first time in years, not out of sadness, but out of gratitude. That man had given me more than my own family ever had. By that point, my investment portfolio had grown to $1.2 million. No one knew. No one suspected. To the world, I was still just Brooks, the invisible middle child, the failure who could not measure up. The invitation arrived in early spring. My parents were celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary, and my father was throwing a large party at the family home. Business partners, extended relatives, old friends, everyone who mattered in his social circle would be there. I almost did not go. What was the point? I would be ignored as usual, shuffled to the side, while Derek and Samantha soaked up attention. But something in me said, this was the moment. 30 years of silence. 30 years of building. Maybe it was time. I drove up to the house in my old car wearing a simple button-down shirt and slacks. Derek pulled up behind me in a brand new luxury sedan, his wife and children piling out in designer clothes. Samantha arrived shortly after, diamonds glittering at her ears and throat, talking loudly about their recent vacation to Europe. Inside the house was full of people laughing and drinking. My father moved through the crowd like a king, shaking hands and accepting congratulations. My mother floated beside him, smiling on command. I found a quiet corner and stood there watching. For nearly an hour, not a single family member came to speak with me. My mother walked past twice without even making eye contact. Derek was too busy impressing the business partners. Samantha was showing off photos on her phone to a group of admiring women. Then my father called for attention. He stood in the center of the living room and raised his glass. 40 years, he began, his voice carrying over the crowd. 40 years of marriage, of hard work, of building something meaningful. He talked about his company, his legacy, his pride. Then he turned to acknowledge his children. "Derek," he said, beaming, "my eldest son who will carry on the family business. I could not be prouder of him." The crowd applauded. Derek raised his glass in acknowledgement. "And Samantha, my beautiful daughter, who married well and lives the life every father dreams for his child." More applause. Samantha blushed with practiced modesty. Then my father's eyes found me in the corner. He paused, and his expression shifted to something between disappointment and resignation. "And then there is Brooks," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. 35 years old, still a basic accountant, still single, still, well, let us just say not everyone is born for greatness. Laughter rippled through the crowd, polite, uncomfortable, but still laughter, at my expense. After the speech, Derek made his way over to me. He was grinning, but there was no warmth in it. "You know, little brother," he said, his voice carrying to those nearby. "If you ever need financial help, just ask. It must be hard being the family disappointment." Samantha appeared beside him, nodding sympathetically. We worry about you, Brooks. You have always been like a ghost in this family. Nothing memorable about you at all." My father joined them, clapping Derek on the back. "At least my other children know how to succeed. Brooks, maybe you should have tried harder." Something shifted inside me. 30 years of silence. 30 years of insults. 30 years of being told I was nothing. I looked at each of them. My father so proud of his cruelty. My brother so confident in his superiority. My sister so certain of her worth. And then I smiled. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. "For 30 years you have called me a failure. For 30 years you compared me to Derek. For 30 years you never once asked what I wanted, what I thought, what I was building." The room grew quiet. People sensed something was happening. "You always said money is the measure of success," I continued. "So let me show you my measure." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. I had printed it that morning, a summary of my investment portfolio. I unfolded it and held it up for my father to see. His eyes scanned the page. I watched the color drain from his face. $4.7 million, diversified across real estate index funds, individual stocks, and retirement accounts, all built over 20 years of quiet, disciplined investing. The room was completely silent. "I did not inherit this," I said. "I did not marry into it. I built it myself dollar by dollar while you were too busy telling me I was worthless to notice." Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Samantha's diamonds suddenly seemed less impressive. My mother had tears streaming down her face. "The only person who ever believed in me was a man named Leonard Wallace," I continued. "A neighbor you all thought was a poor eccentric. He taught me that true wealth is freedom, not the approval of people who cannot see your value." I put the document back in my pocket. "I do not need your validation, Dad. I never did. I came here tonight to finally free myself from 30 years of waiting for you to see me." I turned and walked toward the door. Behind me, no one said a word. "Brooks, wait!" My mother called out, her voice breaking. I stopped but did not turn around. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I am so sorry." I nodded once, then walked out the door and did not look back. The drive home that night was the most peaceful I had ever experienced. I rolled down the windows and let the cool air wash over me. For the first time in my life, I felt truly free. The days that followed were not easy. 30 years of emotional weight does not disappear overnight. There were moments when I felt the old pain rising up the little boy who just wanted his father to notice him, the teenager who ate dinner alone while his family celebrated without him. But slowly, day by day, I began to heal. My father called multiple times in the weeks after the party. I did not answer. My mother sent long text messages filled with apologies and explanations. I read them, but I was not ready to respond. Derek and Samantha remained silent. I later learned why. Derek had been hiding the fact that his division of the company was deeply in debt. He had been living far beyond his means, propped up by loans and credit. Samantha's husband had lost his job 6 months earlier, and they were struggling to maintain their lifestyle. The perfect siblings were not so perfect after all. I focused on myself. I quit my accounting job and dedicated my time to managing my investments and exploring opportunities that interested me. I traveled to places I had only dreamed of visiting. I met people who valued me for who I was, not for my family name or my bank account. At an investment conference in San Diego, I met a woman named Grace. She was smart, kind, and genuine. She had no idea about my wealth when we first started talking. She just liked my quiet demeanor and thoughtful observations. For the first time in my life, I felt seen by someone who expected nothing from me. 6 months after the party, I agreed to meet my mother for coffee. She looked older than I remembered, worn down by guilt and regret. "I failed you," she said, tears in her eyes. "I knew your father was wrong, and I never stood up for you. I was a coward." I looked at her for a long moment. Part of me wanted to rage to list every moment she had let me down, but another part of me knew that holding on to that anger would only hurt myself. "I forgive you," I finally said, "but things cannot go back to how they were. I need distance. I need to protect myself. She nodded, accepting what I offered. With my father and siblings, I maintained polite but distant contact. I attended occasional holidays, but I no longer sought their approval or their love. I had finally accepted that some people are incapable of seeing you clearly, no matter what you achieve. Leonard Wallace taught me that true wealth is not about numbers in a bank account. It is about the freedom to live on your own terms without being held hostage by the opinions of others. Today, I live in a quiet house by the ocean with Grace. We do not need luxury or status symbols. We have something more valuable, peace. Sometimes I sit on my porch in the evening watching the waves roll in, and I think about that scared little boy who wrote in his notebook, "One day I will prove them wrong." I did prove them wrong, but more importantly, I proved something to myself. I am enough. I always was. I just needed to stop waiting for the wrong people to notice. To everyone watching this video, I want to ask you something. Have you ever felt invisible to the people who should love you most? Are you quietly building something while the world underestimates you? Drop your story in the comments below. I would love to hear from you. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe to this channel if you want more stories about ordinary people finding extraordinary strength. And if you are in the middle of your own quiet journey right now, keep going. Your moment will come. Thank you for watching, and thank you for letting me share my story with you. I hope it reminded you that your worth is not determined by those who fail to see it. Stay strong, stay patient, and never stop believing in yourself.